This presentation was prepared for the Africa Green Concern Group on their Africa Day event at Westminster University. It takes a brief look at plastics pollution in Sierra Leone and also presents a few recommendations. The last time I was in Sierra Leone in 2016 during the dry season, the dried out riverbeds in Freetown were choked with plastic and other rubbish. On Lumley Beach in Freetown, fishermen spend hours drawing in huge nets, but often suffer from poor catches due to overfishing by trawlers off the coast of West Africa. After hours of work on the beaches of Lumley, fishermen were catching as much plastic from the oceans, it seemed, as they were catching fish. Where does this plastic come from? Well, this is likely to have been dumped in Freetown or anywhere along the coast of West Africa. Sierra Leone could also receive microplastics from large floating garbage patches circulated by the North Atlantic and South Atlantic gyres. The seas around TOKEH and No. 2 River beaches, which are further down, about 20 miles down the peninsula, as you can see by the red dot, were remarkably clean, with pristine white sands, suggesting that much of the plastic that I noticed was coming from Freetown itself, further up. At the time of my visit, waste plastic was being landfilled or burned daily throughout the country. When plastic is burnt, it releases toxic gases, including hydrogen cyanide, hydrochloric acid, dioxins, and furans, among others. In large towns and cities, this toxic cocktail also combines with exhaust fumes from countless generators and exhaust from vehicles. These gases from burnt plastic are carcinogenic. I also noted landfill next to rivers, as you can see from this picture. At the next rainy season, these would wash away once the rivers swelled up. Single-use plastic water bottles and water bags were rampant, served to guests at home, at parties, meetings, restaurants, public events, absolutely everywhere. Plastic carrier bags were also highly used, although there was also widespread use of renewables, rucksacks and bags for shopping. Whether in city or rural areas, there was no system or supply chain apparent for any kind of waste recycling, except for a nationwide glass soft drinks bottle distribution and collection network run by agents of the Drix factory in Freetown. Plastic waste had even reached the remotest villages in rural areas. Here we can see the mayor of Freetown on the left, wearing the bright orange jacket, in the middle of a landfill just outside Freetown. One cannot imagine the toxic environment. The mayor, as well as many other local councils nationwide, have been very active on street cleaning, refuse collection, and drain clearing. However, the tons of street waste collected each week is relegated to landfill or burnt. When burnt, plastics release toxic gases containing hydrogen cyanide, hydrochloric acid, dioxins, and furans. In cities, this carcinogenic cocktail combines with exhaust fumes from countless generators and vehicles. Landfill next to rivers erodes away in the rainy season as the rivers swell, washing the plastics downstream. Plastics do not biodegrade into natural biological substances. Over many decades, they slowly break down into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually entering the food chain of animals and humans as microplastics. This is not very eco-friendly or sustainable. It poses a health risk and puts off a problem for current and future generations to suffer from and for them to solve. What's also important to see from this picture is, despite all the efforts to displace plastic and remove it from towns and cities, one large rainfall brings a huge flood of new plastics washed down by floods. Traditionally, we've thought of production as a kind of conveyor belt with a start and a finish. You start by extracting resources from the natural environment at one end. You push those resources into the production line, manufacture, process, create, use, and then throw away. This view was never sustainable, but it is the widespread understanding of most people. This is how it works. Unfortunately, this is not how it works, and merely creates, first of all, a depletion, a reduction in the amount of resources available for current and future generations around the world. It makes less available for our children and our grandchildren. And it also creates huge problems in terms of pollution and waste. And of course, we all know about climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions. It never was sustainable. We just did not pay attention to that fact up until now. Sustainable Development Goal 12 aims for sustainable consumption and production. Here we think of recycling, but before you even consider recycling, there are 4 other opportunities we should be exploiting to tackle waste. The 5 R's are: refuse. Refuse to manufacture, to import, to purchase, or to accept plastic. This requires rethinking about alternatives and tough ultimatums to manufacturers and importers about unacceptable materials. The second R is reduce. Reduce the amount manufactured or imported or purchased, accepted or used. Then comes reuse. Now in Sierra Leone, as in many parts of the developing world, innovation abounds, and we find many uses for a lot of different products at the end of their life. However, there is a limit to how much can be actually reused. In the past, market people used to be clamoring for plastic bottles so that they could use them to carry their produce. Now, unfortunately, there are so many plastic bottles, they can't simply use all of them. They really don't have the use for all of these extra plastic bottles, for example. As for plastic drinks bags, these are just discarded by the roadside. Repurpose and repair is also a priority. Again, we hear of innovation where plastic bottles are used for building materials, broken down for all sorts of things, maybe even road surfaces. However, there is a problem with this. These products will eventually wear just from friction and be broken down into microplastics, which still are out there in the environment, and the problem is not solved. If all else fails, then recycle. And by this time, one should have only a small amount of raw materials to recycle into other products. The last R, the recycling, requires evaluation of waste and supply chains, with handlers who gather, sort, trade, and ship, and recycling factories at the other end of the supply chain to process the materials. A true circular economy has no waste outputs, as all outputs feed into inputs. This is planned from before the manufacturing stage and informs manufacturers' decisions about materials to use, how they will be retrieved and reintroduced into the cycle, and what to leave in the ground. A circular economy is a zero-waste economy. The polluter pays principle, if it was applied in national and international laws, could shift responsibility onto manufacturers for the nuisances they unleash into the world. This could also be applied to companies causing mining pollution and deforestation. The trends seem to be pointing in the direction of producers becoming more liable for the end use of their products and the damage they cause. Of course, for Sierra Leone, this would require the will by governments and communities to legislate and enforce the polluter pays principle. Enforcement of environmental issues in Sierra Leone does not have a good track record, especially where it conflicts with lucrative exploitation. Deforestation of protected forests, even during logging and export bans, is carried out under the noses of governments, local authorities, and police with no interference. This is just one example. However, there is no financial interest in perpetuating plastics, except perhaps for importers. A ban could work by providing a good living in terms of fines for those responsible for issuing penalty notices and collecting the fines.